So I hope that everyone has had a chance to go through workshop one. Despite the issue with the scoring, I hope that you had a chance to go through the content and really see how last week's webinar kind of supported and utilized that content for a little bit of application. As we know, understanding about cultural competence and relating to others is a key part of all of our work here at the library, as well as any other organization that serves the public. And it is important that we continually think about how we, as an organization, want to make sure that we are supporting our customers when we can and being able to support them in any way possible. Although there are some challenges at times, and there's a lot that we have to learn about different cultures and new cultures. And so today's webinar is going to really begin to support those ideas and continue to reinforce that. So as you see, today's webinar is about the application of demographics. And if you've started workshop two and workshop three are both heavy demographics workshops. You'll put together a community profile, you put together some challenges and some opportunities. And it's really a point in time when we want to consider not only those who come into our doors, which we'll discuss today, but thinking about how our communities are changing, how they have changed over the last couple of years. And many of us may have been here for a couple of years, so we've seen these changes in action. And so today is really the time that we want to think about the application of these numbers, these statistics, to our programs and services, to our support in the community, ensuring we're connecting with the correct community organizations, etc. So just a briefing on just an overview of demographics. If you've gone through the content, you know this statistic: 37% of all New York City residents are born outside of the United States. This is a large number, especially when you consider the size of New York City. Out of this, 48% of all residents who are in Queens are foreign born. This is as of 2010. And although over the last couple of years, our percent of immigrants have gone down by 1%, we have actually increased in the number of foreign born residents in Queens and in New York. So when we think about these into consideration, we want to think about how New York City has been a continuous immigrant gateway and continues to do so. As we continue to grow and as more people still come to the United States, there are significant opportunities for people to come into the U.S. and participate actively in our economy, in our social atmosphere, and also in our communities and how they interact and build their own communities, and additionally integrate into our communities throughout the city and throughout the United States. So it is important for us to be able to understand not only those who come into the libraries as customers or those who may go online, but really think about all of the people who are in New York City, because anybody in New York City is a potential customer. And we want to really place into perspective some of the challenges that not only we face as library staff members, but also the challenges that our customers may face, and what do these shifts in demographics really bring to our communities. So one community that I do want to highlight today is the Bangladeshi population. As we know, the Bangladesh population has become very, very prevalent. Um, and when we think about where the Bangladesh population is, we want to think about the differences between what our immigrant populations look like today and what they looked like years ago. Now, in 1965, um, there were major shifts in immigration laws that were signed into action. And these immigration laws allowed non European populations to really start immigrating to the United States. before 1965, there were quotas that were set in place for immigrants. Um, there were quotas that were set in place for immigrants that maxed out how many people of different populations can move in based on historical populations. And since we know that there were laws that were created against certain populations coming into the United States, it also limited those groups from coming in until 1965. For New York City and for a majority of the United States, Europeans immigrated into the country at much higher rates. Approximately 75% of immigrants previously were European, which now they represent below 20% of the immigrants that come into the United States. So this is a huge shift for us in our practices that we've established. And um, when we think about several of the issues that might arise when we're considering what are the services that we want to meet, and then also what are the needs of these populations. Additionally, we want to consider really how has the population of New York City changed in a way where the services that we need to provide are starting to really get modified towards a way of supporting non-European populations. So when I highlight the Bangladesh population, we want to think about how their shifts have occurred over the last 2 decades. And the Bangladeshi population is very unique in many ways, not only because they represent a new region of the Asian continent, but additionally because there's a lot of statistical and demographics information that help them to, or that demonstrates difference between the Bangladesh population and the other historical or even current immigrant populations. So as we see, 50%, about 42% of the population grew between 2008 and 2011. This was a large number, and although there's still under 100,000 people, this was a significant shift for the Bangladesh population. Out of all the Bangladeshis in New York City, 60% of them live in Queens. And many of us, especially if you work in the regions where they are, you see a lot of Bangladesh families coming in. And so when we want to think about a community profile, we want to put this into perspective of thinking, how do the characteristics of the Bangladeshi population modify or encourage us to do new programming and modify some of our own understandings of the community? Really, the Bangladeshi population represents something that is not the most positive when it comes to statistical pieces. In this population, over 53% reported higher rates of very limited English proficiency. This means that this is higher than 23%, which is the citywide rate of those who do not speak English more than very well. This does cause challenges because this means that the Bengali language is not part of our standard languages that we've offered in Queens or in New York City. However, we have a significant number of their population who do not speak English that well. Additionally, the Bengali population is some of the poorest of the Asian ethnic groups in the city, and approximately a third of all Bangladeshis live below the poverty line. This is still higher than the citywide rate of 20.1% representative of the population. So this means that Bengalis are not only more likely to not speak English as well, which is a huge barrier to employment, which is a huge barrier to getting some of the services that they need, but additionally, a lot of them live below the poverty line. Secondly, we want to think about the education levels in this comparison, and this is something that many of us might be surprised by, might not be. But the Bangladeshi population had similar education levels when we compare for a high school diploma or its equivalent at just over 20%. So the Bangladeshi population is not less educated than the rest of the population, nor are they less educated than many of the other immigrant groups. But they still had higher rates of poverty, lower rates of English language proficiency, and their median incomes were significantly lower on average than all the other populations in New York City, where New York City's average income was approximately 50,000. Bangladeshis only brought in around 30,000 to 35,000, when the individual income averaged about 30 to 33,000. Bangladeshi populations only brought in about $13,000, which means that they were normally about $20,000 less in income on both family and individual than other populations in New York City. Additionally, these things might be considered in context of 50% of the Bangladeshi population came in after 2000, which is a very, very large number. So we're saying that this population has doubled in the last 16 years. And when this information came out, this was just 2010, 2011. So in the first decade of the 2000s, the Bangladeshi population doubled. Additionally, really, the populations of immigrants that have come in have established their communities much prior to current times, right? So in 2000, many of these populations already had significant numbers in the city. However, 32% in general it were coming after 2000. So if we look at the average number across the board, we see that 32% approximately came after 2000. So this is also something that we want to consider when we're thinking about the programs and services that we offer, when we think about some of the challenges that we might face, is that this is a relatively new population. Although they have been here for a while, a majority of their population has come in the last 10 to 15 years, which means that certain services may not have been equipped to meet the needs of this specific population. They generally have higher rates of overcrowding in households, significantly more than other communities in New York City. Bangladeshis also generally pay more of their income towards rent on average than other communities. So when we think about all of these pieces and when we consider what the library's role is in supporting these communities, there are certain things that we want to take into consideration.